You're going to find gaps that you want to cover, and you're going to find things that you want to eliminate.
Because in the last 3 weeks, we have had 1 plane crash and 2 averted plane crashes. When investigations are ongoing, they'll say that it's because of one system failure or the other. Is it that these things are not checked, the airplanes are not checked before they fly?
First, from a legal standpoint, the vast majority of what I think has gone wrong are not legal issues. But obviously, when an accident occurs, then it becomes a legal issue because there are questions of liability. So I probably won't speak that much to technical aspects of it, but from my understanding of the law, everybody has a responsibility. I certainly don't agree that the Civil Aviation Authority has to check aircraft, whether it's in the morning or at night or periodically. I think that that's a misunderstanding of what the law is. The Civil Aviation Authority licenses personnel and also provides permit to operators to operate in the industry. Now, those licenses, from a legal standpoint, are one of the most important tools that any Civil Aviation Authority has for its oversight functions. Because essentially what a license means is that you operate subject to terms and conditions that is created by the licensor, in this case the Civil Aviation Authority. And so if you fail to operate within those parameters, the Civil Aviation Authority has authority over you to revoke the license, create additional terms, or even penalize your operations.
You say that the guidelines are followed, but yet we still have operational issues, regulatory issues, safety issues. Then where can we actually trace the problem to?
Again, it goes back to a total societal approach to complying, one. Secondly, a national approach to enforcement of standards, not necessarily in aviation, but even in the legal profession or the medical profession, and in everything else. And thirdly is also understanding the differences in our environment from other environments. And so if your question is, why are these accidents occurring? Well, from what I've seen, at least the report, the preliminary report that's been published, it seems here you have an equipment that blew all the bells and the whistles about it being inappropriate to be put in the air, but you have a crew somehow that still put that equipment in the air. My questions would be, how did that happen and why did that happen? But as a lawyer, that firmly places liability on the carrier. The carrier has the obligation to recruit its employees and also to provide the operating manual. And so if your employee, acting in the course of the employment, operates the aircraft in a manner that is inconsistent with the regulatory framework or for the safe transportation of the passengers, then you would be liable, and that's exactly what my position would be here.
Now, let me ask you, recently, after the Associated Airlines plane crash, now the Ministry of Aviation and the minister particularly has been accused of being more conscious of revenue generation and structural development as opposed to the safety of the airline operations. What do you really think about that, those accusations?
It's strange. I would hope that is not the case, and frankly I doubt that that would be the case, because what use is an airport if planes cannot fly safely? I mean, at the end of the day, the whole commercial aspect of aviation is generating revenue from people flying. People will not fly unless they feel safe. Now, from a legal standpoint, though, the Civil Aviation Act creates the Civil Aviation Authority that is responsible for safety. The relationship of the Federal Ministry of Aviation and the Civil Aviation Authority is more in the context of policy. And unless someone is saying that the Civil Aviation, the Federal Ministry of Aviation is meddling in safety, then I don't know that we're placing the responsibility at the right place to say that, well, it's because the Ministry of Aviation is fixing airports and neglecting other areas. There are companies that are owned by government in the aviation industry, for instance, FAN, Federal Airports Authority, but that's a service provider. And what they're doing is providing an airport service. Now, that's not the Ministry of Aviation. There's a Nigerian Airspace Management Agency. That's a service provider providing navigational services. Again, what they're doing is providing a service. Then you have the Civil Aviation Authority for regulating both FAN, NAMA, the airlines, and all other operators in the industry. And I think that we have to understand what roles each person has before determining who dropped the ball and when.
The Accident and Investigation Bureau is saddled with the responsibility of investigating a plane crash. Now, that's according to the Act. But is it not good or better for us to have investigations periodically to avoid these crashes in the first place?
Well, I mean, the role of the Accident and Investigation Bureau, which I understand is now referred to as the Accident Investigation and Prevention Bureau, really cannot investigate incidents and accidents. So I'm sure there are a bunch of incidents like a lost tire, a hard landing, that they are investigating periodically. And so they must be doing something every day, but they also investigate crashes that result in injury or fatalities. And you have to remember that the purpose of that investigation itself is primarily to discover what happened for the main purpose of preventing it in the future. And so the report of the Accident Investigation Bureau has absolutely no evidentiary value. It is not for apportioning blame or for holding anybody responsible. It's for finding out what went wrong, and that's the case all over the world. Every time there's an accident, there's a lesson to learn. And so that is what an Accident and Investigation Bureau does. For instance, in the United States, you've got the NTSB, that is the National Transportation and Safety Board. And they investigate accidents also for the purpose of determining what new regulations, maybe what the aircraft manufacturers or even pilot trainers and pilots need to know to prevent that from happening in the future. I think that has to be the role of the Accident and Investigation Bureau here. What I'll be more interested in is whether there is some exchange of information between the accident investigators and the regulators to make sure that whatever they're discovering are implemented to protect the lives of people. As counsel, if I were engaged by victims of an air crash, I'm not going to look to the accident investigation report. It has absolutely no value to me in court. And if I were defending an airline, I would certainly object to the presentation of that kind of report, because the laws are very clear that it has absolutely no evidentiary value. So for me, the bigger question for me from a public standpoint is, what are they discovering as the causes of accidents each time one happens? And what are we doing? What kind of relationship exists or mechanisms exist to ensure that that is going to the appropriate quarters so that they can use that to regulate the industry better?
As regards compensation for survivors, victims, and their families, why do compensation take so long before they eventually come through?
I don't know that there is an exact time frame, but there are realistic expectations. And the conventions and the law and the domestic laws in Nigeria also capture those realistic expectations. One of the realistic expectations is that typically there should be an interim payment that alleviates obviously the sufferings of family members of victims or surviving victims of an accident. But the process itself to how the compensation ultimately becomes paid depends on several factors. For instance, some people would go to court, and so if they go to court, whatever they get paid would depend on what the decision of the court is. And then obviously some people would pursue the insurance and accept the limit of liability and waive any rights, waive liability to the airline. But even that is a process. You're going to have to pay to the next of kin or the surviving family. How do you determine that? That also changes depending on what environment you are. Culture, in a place like Nigeria, securing the letters of administration, polygamy, and all kinds of other issues. And so there's really no set time. But then again, I do expect that insurance and carriers do everything possible to make sure that those processes are done in the most expeditious manner.
So if forever takes forever, you have to wait forever?
Well, a reasonable time shouldn't take forever, But think about it. If, for instance, someone's gone to court